6 years after breaking up with my ex-girlfriend, I saw her again at a class reunion. 6 years had passed since my ex-girlfriend and I broke up. A lot had changed in my life, or so I thought, until I saw her again at our class reunion. She walked in arm with a younger man, a confident smile plastered across her face as she publicly announced their engagement. The private room erupted into cheers and applause, people clapping like they had front-row seats to a soap opera. All eyes darted between the happy couple and me, clearly expecting some kind of dramatic reaction from the heartbroken ex-boyfriend. But I didn't take the bait. Instead, I calmly pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and transferred $1,000 as an engagement gift. My announcement of the gift was loud enough to draw attention. A murmur spread across the room. I could feel every single classmate staring, their expressions a mix of shock, curiosity, and anticipation. The whispers and side glances didn't bother me. I kept my composure. Olivia, my ex, however, was another story. Her confident facade cracked. Her eyes widened as she glanced at her phone, seeing the notification of my transfer. She excused herself and hurried over to me, her smile replaced with a panicked expression. Pulling me aside, she whispered urgently, "Jack, what are you doing? It's been 6 years. Isn't that enough time for you to get over it?" I raised an eyebrow but let her continue. "This is all for show," she added quickly, glancing over her shoulder at her fiancé, Ethan, who was basking in the attention. "His family has been pressuring him to get married. This engagement isn't real. After this is over, I'll come back to you. I promise." I stood there, listening to her familiar script. It was almost laughable. How many times had I heard these words? Back when we were together, every time she drifted toward Ethan, she would return with empty promises to make it up to me, claiming I was the one she truly loved. Back then, I had believed her. I had clung to those promises, swallowing every word like it was gospel. But not anymore. I couldn't help but let out a bitter laugh. "Olivia," I said, my voice steady, "we broke up 6 years ago. Whatever you're doing with Ethan, whether it's real or fake, it has nothing to do with me." Her face fell. "What do you mean we broke up? We've just been having a cold war these past years, haven't we?" Her words caught me off guard. A cold war? For 6 years? That was rich. "Olivia," I said firmly, "a cold war doesn't last 6 years. I blocked you, deleted your number, sent you an email saying we were done, and moved all my stuff out of our apartment. Everyone knows we broke up, everyone except you, apparently." Her eyes turned icy. "Jack, you're being ridiculous. You're the one who hasn't moved on," she hissed, her voice laced with venom. I didn't bother arguing. I just let out a humorless laugh, turned on my heel, and left the room. If I had known this reunion would turn into such a spectacle, I wouldn't have bothered coming. But before I could make it far, I heard hurried footsteps behind me. "Jack, wait!" Ethan's voice rang out, followed by the sound of his polished dress shoes tapping against the floor. He jogged ahead of Olivia, blocking my path with a look of mock concern. "Brother Jack, why are you leaving so suddenly? It's a good reunion. Are you still upset about what happened 6 years ago? If you're feeling guilty, I can apologize." He smirked as he emphasized the words 6 years ago, his tone dripping with condescension. Olivia caught up, her face darkened with anger. She instinctively stepped in front of Ethan, shielding him like a protective barrier. Her glare could have frozen lava. "Jack, why are you being so petty?" she snapped, her voice sharp enough to cut through the tension. "How can you still hold on to a grudge over something so small?" That was the question Olivia had the audacity to ask me. I found it almost laughable. In her eyes, my life, my dignity, everything about me was just a trivial matter, a small thing. But the events of 6 years ago? They weren't small to me. Not when it all started, because Ethan, her so-called best friend, claimed he was afraid of the dark and couldn't go downstairs to buy some medicine. Olivia chose to abandon me. Not metaphorically. No, she literally left me stranded on a freezing highway on our wedding day. I was wearing a suit, shivering in a snowstorm, while cars whizzed past me at terrifying speeds. I trudged through that storm for 3 hours to reach the wedding venue. By the time I finally got there, I was unrecognizable. My clothes were soaked, my fingers numb, my face pale from the biting cold. All I wanted was to get married to the woman I loved, but instead, I was greeted with a room full of stunned guests and whispers behind my back. In that moment, I had no choice but to cancel the wedding. Right there, in front of everyone, I announced that it was over. The humiliation was unbearable. And where was Olivia during all of this? Not with me. No, she was taking care of Ethan. I found out later that she'd spent the night at his place because he was traumatized. Traumatized? For what? Because he thought he might have to go outside in the dark? And as if that wasn't enough, Ethan even posted about it on social media, painting himself as the poor victim while turning me into the punchline of every joke. That incident was the 99th time Olivia had chosen Ethan over me. 99 times. It was in that moment that something inside me broke. I couldn't stay. I accepted a job transfer and left for the United States. For 6 years, I stayed away, rebuilding my life far from the chaos and heartbreak Olivia had left in her wake. But now, here I was, back in town, face to face with Ethan. Of course, he couldn't help himself. He just had to bring up old wounds, probably hoping to get a reaction out of me. In the past, I would have lost my temper. I would have shouted, slammed the table, let my emotions take over. But now I was calm. I'd moved on. Or at least, I'd learned how to pretend I had. So I looked him straight in the eye and said, "There's nothing to be angry about. Olivia and I ended things 6 years ago. Besides, I'm doing just fine now." But Ethan wasn't satisfied. He kept going, laying on his fake charm thick. "Brother Jack, don't misunderstand. My engagement to Olivia is just for show, to appease my relatives back home. If it bothers you, I can cancel the engagement party." He said it with a smile, but his words were dripping with condescension. Before he could finish, Olivia interrupted, her voice sharp. "No way, Ethan!" I couldn't help but notice the irony. Now Olivia was worried about how embarrassing it would be to cancel a wedding. But where was that concern when she left me to face a room full of guests alone? When she turned me into a joke for everyone to laugh at? Seeing the look in my eyes, Olivia faltered. She bit her lip and softened her tone, trying to explain. "Jack, Ethan needs me. I can't just ignore him." Ethan, ever the actor, played along perfectly. He took off his engagement ring and held it out to me with mock sincerity. "Brother Jack, this ring was originally yours. Now that you're back, I should return it to its rightful owner." The sight of that ring made my stomach churn. It was the same ring Olivia had designed for me all those years ago. But I never got the chance to wear it. Ethan said he liked it, and Olivia gave it to him without hesitation. She didn't even think twice. Now here he was, flaunting it in front of me like it was some grand gesture. I reached out, took the ring, and without a word, tossed it into the nearest trash can. "I don't want something someone else has worn," I said coldly, turning to leave. I didn't have time for their games, but Olivia wasn't ready to let me go. She ran after me, grabbing my hand. "Jack, stop. What do you mean by ignoring me? I've already agreed to marry you. What more do you want?" She sounded desperate, but I didn't care. I pulled my hand away and replied, "Do whatever you want, but don't stop me from going back to my wife and child." Her eyes widened as she noticed something she hadn't before. A wedding ring on my finger. Her grip loosened, and I walked away without looking back. Behind me, I heard her voice trembling. "Jack, what do you mean? Explain yourself." She was ready to chase after me again, but Ethan suddenly stumbled, clutching his head as if in pain. "Olivia, my head hurts so much," he groaned, grabbing her arm for support. And just like that, she forgot about me. She always did. Her face was full of concern as she looked at me. "Ethan, what's wrong? Did you drink too much earlier?" She turned her head toward Jack, her tone laced with urgency. "Jack, Ethan is feeling sick from the alcohol. I am going to take him to a nearby hotel to rest." Olivia's voice faltered as her eyes met mine, her expression guilty, as if silently asking for my approval. It was almost laughable. Was she really trying to explain herself to me, as though my opinion still mattered? Before she could finish her sentence, I cut her off coldly, my tone sharp enough to make her flinch. "Go if you want to. You do not need to ask me for permission. Do not forget, we broke up a long time ago." My words hung in the air like a slap. Olivia's eyes widened in shock, clearly caught off guard. She had not expected this reaction from me at all. In the past, I would have done everything in my power to stop her. Whenever I even suspected she would be alone with Ethan, my jealousy would consume me. I would go to ridiculous lengths, frantic and desperate, all because I loved her and cared about her. But things were different now. That love was long gone, replaced with the indifference born from moving on. So what did it matter to me now who she chose to spend her time with? Hearing my response, Olivia's voice became sharper, her breathing quick and uneven. "Jack, are you really not worried at all about me going to a hotel alone with Ethan?" It was clear what she wanted. She wanted me to react like I used to, angry, jealous, even begging her not to go. I could almost see it written all over her face. But those days were over. Back then, my efforts to stop her had only earned me accusations of being controlling, narrow-minded, and suspicious. She had once told me that people with dirty minds see everything as dirty. And now, when I was giving her the freedom she always claimed to want, she was somehow unhappy about it. A bitter smile crossed my face as I looked at her. "You are just my ex. Why should I care about what you do or who you are with?" My words hit their mark, and Olivia's face paled. Her lips parted as if to say something, but she hesitated. Before she could muster a reply, Ethan groaned dramatically, interrupting the moment. "My head. It hurts so much," he muttered, clutching his temples. Olivia quickly turned her attention back to him, her expression shifting from shock to concern. She supported Ethan as he leaned on her, but not before giving me one last icy glare. "Jack, you said it yourself. Do not regret this later," she snapped, her voice brimming with defiance. "Let's go, Ethan. I will take you to the hotel." With that, she helped him toward the door, her posture stiff with indignation. I stood there for a moment, watching them leave. I could see through her act. This was her, trying to make me jealous, trying to provoke a reaction. But this time, I felt nothing. Instead, I turned on my heel and left without a second glance. My mind was already elsewhere, focused on returning to my wife and daughter. This trip back home, attending the reunion, was always just a secondary purpose. The real reason I had come here was to take my wife, Emma, and our daughter, Lily, on a much-needed vacation. Reflecting on it now, I could almost thank Olivia. If she had not pushed me away 6 years ago, I might never have met Emma or experienced the joy of having a family. Emma and I met on the streets of Paris during one of the lowest points of my life. I had been wandering aimlessly, nursing a minor injury and a wounded heart, when I accidentally bumped into her. I had apologized profusely, embarrassed by my clumsiness, but instead of being annoyed, she smiled warmly and insisted on buying me a cup of hot milk tea. That simple gesture, it was like a ray of sunshine breaking through a storm. Her kindness gave me hope that life could still be beautiful. We exchanged contact information, and over time I found myself confiding in her, sharing my pain and frustration. She listened without judgment, her presence a soothing balm to my bruised soul. Emma was everything Olivia was not: gentle, understanding, and endlessly supportive. With her encouragement, I slowly left the shadows of my past behind. It was not long before we fell in love, got married, and welcomed our little Lily into the world. They became my reason for everything, my motivation to work hard and keep moving forward. The thought of seeing them again made my heart light. My steps quickened as I made my way back to the hotel, eager to be with my family, but fate had other plans. Just as I arrived, I ran into Olivia and Ethan in the lobby. My stomach sank. What were the odds? Olivia froze when she saw me, her expression a mix of surprise and suspicion. "Why are you here?" she demanded, her tone sharp. Ethan, ever the instigator, smirked and said, "Olivia, Brother Jack must have realized his mistake and followed us here to apologize." Olivia's eyes lit up at his words, a flicker of satisfaction crossing her face. The corners of her mouth lifted into a smug smile, but her voice remained arrogant. "Jack, were you not acting all tough earlier? What is this? Regretting it already? Did you follow us here to beg for forgiveness?" Her self-absorbed attitude was nauseating. I stared at her unmoved, the disgust I felt reflected in my cold, unwavering gaze. I laughed coldly, my voice laced with contempt. "Don't flatter yourself," I said, crossing my arms. "I just happen to be staying here." But Olivia, ever the stubborn and self-absorbed person she was, didn't believe me. She snorted, her expression cold and mocking. "This is a couple's hotel," she shot back, her voice dripping with accusation. "You're staying here alone? Who are you trying to fool?" Before I could respond, the door behind me creaked open. Emma walked out gracefully, her presence radiating calm and warmth. She greeted me with a gentle smile and said, "Honey, you're back." Her tone was as sweet as ever, a stark contrast to the tension filling the air. "What?" Olivia's voice cracked, and her face froze in shock. "Honey," she repeated, her eyes darting between Emma and me. Her disbelief turned to something darker when her gaze landed on the matching wedding ring on Emma's finger. Her face paled, her expression shifting from shock to anger as she struggled to comprehend what she was seeing. "A wedding ring?" she murmured, her voice trembling. "Jack, you really did get married." But just as quickly as her vulnerability appeared, she buried it beneath her usual frosty demeanor. Her lips curled into a sneer as she looked Emma up and down, her gaze filled with disdain. "So, you're Jack's wife? You don't look like much. Marriage doesn't mean anything. How long have you two been together anyway?" She crossed her arms and leaned in slightly, as if daring Emma to respond. "Jack and I have 18 years of history. How could you possibly compare? Jack loves me the most and always will. You're just a phase." I stood there, stunned by her audacity. Olivia's voice rose, her words laced with venom. "Jack left the country back then because of me. We had a fight, and he found you out of spite. You were just a rebound, a convenient distraction. Why else would he return home so suddenly? It was obviously for me." Her confidence swelled as she leaned closer, her tone almost pitying now. "Let me tell you, Jack coming back to me is just a matter of time. If you're smart, you'll leave now. Save yourself the embarrassment of being dumped later." I clenched my fists, utterly speechless. Olivia's arrogance was beyond anything I had prepared for. But Emma, ever composed and gracious, stood her ground. She looked at Olivia with an expression that could only be described as pity, as though she were addressing a foolish child. Even in the face of Olivia's blatant disrespect, Emma maintained her inherent gentleness and poise. Without raising her voice, Emma stepped closer to me, linking her arm with mine in a quiet but powerful gesture of solidarity. "Jack and you are in the past," she said, her tone calm but cutting. "Now, I am his wife, and you are just an ex, irrelevant and not worth mentioning at all." Emma's words, delivered with such grace, hit Olivia like a thunderclap. Her face turned beet red and her anger boiled over. "You bitch!" Olivia shrieked, her voice trembling with rage. She raised her hand, her intent clear. "You're just my replacement. Jack loves me the most. He will come back to me. It's only a matter of time." As her hand swung towards Emma's face, I acted without thinking. I caught her wrist mid-air and slapped her across the cheek in one swift motion. The sound echoed in the hallway. "Olivia, that's enough!" I snapped, my voice colder than I had ever heard it. For a moment, there was silence. Olivia stared at me, her hand clutching her reddened cheek. Her eyes welled with tears, the shock of what had just happened settling in. You hit me?" she stammered, her voice breaking. "You hit me for her? After everything I've done for you? After all the years I waited for you? Do you even know how I've suffered?" She stormed off, dragging her bewildered companion behind her, her heels clicking angrily against the tiled floor. I watched her retreating figure with a mix of anger and disbelief. Even now, she clung to the delusion that the world revolved around her. Turning to Emma, I reached for her hands. "Are you okay, honey? Did she hurt you?" I asked, my voice softening as I searched her face for any signs of distress. Emma smiled up at me, her usual calm demeanor unwavering. "I'm fine," she said gently, brushing her fingers against mine. Some people just don't know how to let go of the past. I kissed her forehead, silently promising her that Olivia would never come between us again. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Olivia wasn't the type to walk away quietly. The next morning, as we sat in the hotel restaurant enjoying breakfast, Olivia appeared once more. She looked disheveled, her makeup smudged, and her clothes slightly wrinkled, but the haughty expression on her face remained. Without hesitation, she strode to the table next to ours and sat down, her posture stiff with defiance. "Jack, we need to talk," she began, completely ignoring Emma's presence. Her voice was sharp, her words aimed directly at me. "You can't just erase me from your life so easily. We have history. You owe me more than this." Emma reached for my hand under the table, her touch grounding me as I took a deep breath. "Olivia," Emma said finally, her voice steady and unwavering, "I think it's clear that Jack has moved on. There's no reason for these constant interruptions." Her words were like a dagger, slicing through Olivia's facade. But instead of backing down, Olivia leaned forward, her eyes flashing with desperation. "This isn't over, Jack," she hissed. "You'll see. I'm not going anywhere." But as she left the restaurant, I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. Olivia's attempts to insert herself back into my life only solidified one thing. My past no longer had any power over me. Olivia laughed mockingly, her voice dripping with condescension as she pointed at Emma, scrutinizing her as though she were a cheap knockoff. "Moved on? With you?" she sneered, her words cutting through the air like shards of glass. "Don't make me laugh. Jack will never forget what we had. No matter what he says, I'm the woman he'll always love." My patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. I locked eyes with her, my voice firm and unwavering. "Olivia, enough. I don't owe you anything. You had your chance, and you threw it all away. I'm happy with my family, something you'll never understand, so please leave us alone." But of course, she didn't. Olivia abruptly stood, slamming her hands on the table with such force that several heads in the restaurant turned in our direction. "You think you can just discard me?" she spat, her voice trembling with rage. "After everything I did for you? I sacrificed so much, and now you're here playing the perfect husband and father with her." Emma, though clearly offended, remained composed, her silence radiating strength. I, however, was done holding back. "Sacrificed?" I shot back, my voice rising just enough to let her know I wasn't afraid to call her out. "You sacrificed our relationship for Ethan. You sacrificed my dignity on what should have been our wedding day. The only thing you sacrificed was my patience. And now, what do you want? More attention? An apology? You're not getting any of that." Before she could respond, Ethan walked into the restaurant, his face a mix of embarrassment and discomfort. He quickly moved toward Olivia, grabbing her arm in an attempt to defuse the situation. "Olivia, what are you doing? Why are you humiliating yourself like this? He's made it clear he wants nothing to do with you. Let's go!" But Olivia yanked her arm away, her finger jabbing toward him as if he were the embodiment of all her problems. You're the reason for all of this. If it weren't for you, I never would have lost Jack. You promised me the world, but all you gave me was shame." Ethan, visibly embarrassed, tried to defend himself, but even he seemed tired of the chaos. With a resigned sigh, he left, abandoning Olivia to face the mess she had created. For a brief moment, she stood there alone, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of her actions had finally caught up with her. Then she turned to me, her eyes brimming with tears, though that familiar manipulative glint remained. "Jack, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you," she began, her voice softening, almost pleading. "I was confused. I was young and immature. Please, give me another chance. I can be the woman you deserve." Before I could respond, Emma, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. Her tone was calm, almost unnervingly so, but her words were sharp enough to cut through Olivia's facade. "Olivia, what you need to understand is that the world doesn't revolve around you. You had Jack, but you chose something else. Now he's my husband, and nothing you say or do will change that." Olivia's tears spilled over as she broke into sobs. but I felt no pity. I knew it wasn't real regret, just frustration at not getting her way. I decided it was time to put an end to this for good. Olivia, this ends here. Don't contact me again. Don't speak to me. I have a life and a family. I hope you find peace someday, but it won't be with me. Taking Emma's hand in mine, I stood and walked away, leaving Olivia behind, defeated and alone. As we exited the restaurant and made our way through the hotel lobby, a wave of clarity washed over me. For the first time in years, I felt like I had truly closed that chapter of my life. Emma was everything Olivia could never be. Kind, loving, dependable. She was my partner, my anchor, my peace. When we returned to our room, Lily ran up to me, her innocent smile lighting up the space. In that moment, I realized I didn't need anything else in the world. I already had everything I could ever want. The following weeks passed peacefully. Emma and I enjoyed the rest of our trip with Lily, visiting beautiful places and creating memories that would last a lifetime. Olivia and Ethan didn't reappear, and I finally breathed a sigh of relief, knowing that the weight of my past was firmly behind me. Back home, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Emma continued to be my rock, always kind and supportive, and Lily's laughter filled our days with joy. Every time I looked at them, I felt immense gratitude for the life I had now. The past, with all its pain and regrets, no longer held any power over me. One afternoon, while working in my office, an email notification popped up on my screen. The sender's name stopped me in my tracks. Olivia. For a moment, I hesitated, unsure if I even wanted to open it. But I knew I needed to face it with maturity. The email was long, filled with apologies and regret. She wrote about how she had reflected on everything and finally understood how much she had hurt me. Though her words carried the weight of remorse, I read them without emotion. I had moved on, and no apology could change the past. What mattered was the present, and in my present, there was no room for Olivia. She said she was trying to move on, but was still consumed by the pain of losing me. Her words were heavy with regret and longing, and though I read every line calmly, something inside me felt detached. There was no anger, no resentment, not even the satisfaction of knowing she still thought of me. All I felt was emptiness, as if her words were drifting past me, unable to find a place to land. It was strange, almost surreal, how someone who had once been the center of my universe could now feel so distant, so irrelevant. It made me think about how fragile connections could be, how time and circumstances could turn what once felt like destiny into just another chapter in a book you no longer cared to reread. I closed the email without replying. I knew that giving her any response, even the most polite or neutral acknowledgement, would only risk reopening wounds that needed to stay sealed. It was not about holding a grudge. It was about protecting the peace I had worked so hard to rebuild. Sometimes, silence is not an act of cruelty, but a necessary boundary, a way of saying, this is where it ends. Months later, I heard through mutual acquaintances that Olivia and Ethan had broken up. The news did not surprise me at all. Their relationship had always seemed fragile, built on shallow foundations and filled with manipulation masquerading as passion. Olivia had always been adept at crafting narratives, but even the most convincing stories crumble when they lack authenticity. I also heard whispers about her facing some personal difficulties, though I chose not to dig deeper. Her life, her choices, and her struggles were no longer mine to carry. I had moved on, and part of moving on meant letting go of the compulsion to keep tabs on someone who no longer held any claim on my future. What truly surprised me, though, was the realization that it was not Olivia who needed my forgiveness. It was myself. For years, I had allowed that toxic relationship to consume far too much of my energy, my time, and my self-worth. I had let her words and actions define my moods, my confidence, and even my sense of identity. Forgiving myself was not easy. It required me to confront the parts of myself that had been complicit, the parts that had ignored red flags and stayed too long. But when I finally reached that point, when I truly let go of the guilt and the self-blame, I felt a lightness I had never experienced before. It was as if a weight, I had carried for years had finally been lifted. Now, when I look back, I no longer feel bitterness or regret. Instead, I see those years as a hard but necessary lesson, a path I had to walk to become the person I am today. Emma and Lily, my wife and daughter, are my world now. They are my reason to keep growing, to keep striving, and to face each day with gratitude. The love we share is unlike anything I have ever known. Pure, genuine, and built on a foundation of mutual respect and trust. It is the kind of love that does not demand or control but uplifts and supports. It is the kind of love that sets you free. I have no idea where Olivia is now or how her life turned out, and to be honest, I do not need to know. I hope, in some way, she has found her own peace, her own version of happiness. But as for me, I have everything I could ever want. A loving family, a warm and secure home, and the clarity to know that my past does not define me. Sometimes life takes us down painful, winding roads that feel endless. But I believe that, in the end, everything falls into place as it is meant to. If there is one thing I have learned through all of this, it is that true love does not bind, suffocate, or hurt. True love sets you free, and it is that freedom, that incredible sense of peace and wholeness that I have finally found.